Welcome. What is up? This is the Innate Effect Podcast with Dr. Alex DeFrancisco, where we talk about everything from health to wellness to business and mindset in the everyday life of a pediatric chiropractor. So without further ado, let's get into it. What is going on, y'all? We're going to talk about this week's episode known as Stressed Before Birth. So before we get a little too far into that, I want to talk about what we talked about in our last pod. We talked about different types of stressors that can occur for humans, right? We talked about mental stress, physical stress, emotional stress, spiritual stress. All of those things essentially add up to the body as stress. So although humans like to compartmentalize them into different categories, it's still just stress, right? The body only knows it as one thing. And so that one thing, we have a threshold for it, right? So the body has a certain amount of stress, no matter the type, that it can handle on a daily basis, right? It has a certain amount of energy that the nervous system can use to react and adapt to the daily stressors that happen in our life, in our environment, right? And so the more efficient that humans can be, the more efficient that somebody can be reacting and adapting to that stress, the more energy they're going to have left over overall for different types of functions that happen, in the human body on a daily basis. So they're not leaking energy essentially throughout the day because they have a less efficient nervous system. And that's what we talked about. That's where we come in as chiropractors, right? We're working with the nervous system specifically. I said in our last pod that we are more concerned with what the spinal column is protecting, known as your spinal cord, which goes up into the brain and then also sprouts out into all of the different nerves that go to different muscles, glands, organs, and all of that communication to all of those things happen through those nerves to the spinal cord, back up to the brain. The brain understands what's going on and sends out all of the resources back the other way. And that's what we do, like I said, as chiropractors, is we allow for that process to happen more efficiently on a more efficient and frequent basis. Okay. So what I want to get into today, the title of the pod is Stressed Before Birth. So how can these stressors already start to affect the neurology of a newborn before it's even a newborn, while it's still, while mom is still pregnant with baby? How can these stressors affect the child before they're even born into the world? Well, like I had talked about previously, for those 9 months while mom is pregnant, there's nobody that understands them more than their child, right? All of those emotions, all of that stress, all of that nutrition is hardwired into baby through the umbilical cord. So they really know what you went through for those 9 months. They know whether it was a good 9 months, whether it was a stressful 9 months, whether it was a stressful maybe 1 month in particular. It knows the full story better than anybody, even if they were there every step of the way for you, right? So what I want to get into today is how can this stress affect a baby before they come out into the world? So before we do that, we have to get into the nervous system and go a little bit deeper. So last week, like I said, last pod, we explained the three main components of the nervous system as a whole, right? Brain, spinal cord, and the nerves. So now we're going to go a little bit more specific and we're going to get into the autonomic nervous system. So what does that division of the nervous system do? That's the division that controls all of the involuntary functions that go on in your body on a daily basis. Breathing, the lungs or the air in your lungs, your heart beating, your spleen functioning, your liver functioning. All of these things happen coinciding with one another. They all happen without our knowledge. We don't have to think about doing these things, right? And so the way the body is able to accomplish that is through the autonomic nervous system, right? And so now there's two specific divisions of the autonomic nervous system. One takes over when we are in a rest and recovery, relaxed state, and one takes over in a greater amount, in times of a greater amount of stress, right? So let's start with that first one that I had talked about, the rest and the recovery portion, right? This is also known as the parasympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system. And a really easy way to just remember that, if you don't want to remember parasympathetic, like I said, this is known as rest and recovery. This is rest and digest. That is where the majority of our lives should be spent. The majority of the autonomic nervous system function should happen under parasympathetic control. And so when that happens, that is when growth develops. So like while your child is legitimately growing, as they are getting bigger, milestone development, all of those things are hit during the parasympathetic time, when that is the division that is essentially running the show, right? Healing from sickness, injury, or even a workout. This is where the rest and recovery portion comes from. So I tell all of my athletes, or even just the weekend warriors in our practice here, that during the workout, during the game, that's not when the gains, so to speak, are happening. The gains happen when you finally do that last lift, when you finally run that last sprint. It's the aftermath where your body now relaxes and is able to rest and recover and regenerate and grow from those experiences that you just put it through. And that's where the gains come from. That's where the improvements come from, is during the rest and recovery portion of that. It doesn't actually happen during the workout itself. That is a sympathetic division. That is the fight or flight, and we'll get into that. So whether it is the workout that you put yourself through, whether it was an injury that you had sustained, whether you're feeling a little bit under the weather with a sickness, all healing happens under the parasympathetic division. Something else that happens under parasympathetic control is digestion and excretion. Both of those things take place here. So whether it is digesting your food, peristalsis, moving that food throughout the intestines, right? Breaking down some of the nutrients and the molecules, and then the actual process of excreting that, using the bathroom, all of that also happens under parasympathetic control, right? And all in all, it takes a very low amount of energy for your body to be able to run this process, right? Parasympathetic does not take a lot of energy, and it's actually preparing you to gain energy, right? So 90%, 95%, if you're lucky, of your life should be spent under parasympathetic control. Now, there are times when life gets really stressful really fast. Evolutionarily, the sympathetic division of your autonomic nervous system, or the fight or flight division, that was originally designed for you to run away or fight very immediate danger. So a predator out in the wild, whether it was a wolf, a tiger, a bear, whatever humans were running from back in the day, you wanted to get up and out of there as quickly as humanly possible, and you didn't want to stop for directions or think about what was going on. The only thing that was important at that moment was survival. And that's why it's labeled the fight or flight division. So some of the things that happen when the autonomic nervous system is under sympathetic control, when those involuntary functions are under sympathetic control, some things start to happen that are a little bit different. So that starts to limit the amount of growth and milestone development that can greatly hinder a child's growth and, like I said, development. The amount of time that's necessary for somebody to heal from a sickness, a major injury, or a workout, the recovery time increases, which is a bad thing, right? Or so to speak, you want that to be as little time as humanly possible. So I tell a lot of, especially CrossFitters that come into the practice, or people that really do work out, really hard 5 times, 6 times, 7 times a week. Based on what I'm seeing with some of the scans that we take in our office, more specifically our heart rate variability scan, if they are way over in the sympathetic division, if their nervous system is constantly stressed out, I compare that very much to a boxer that just didn't hear the bell, that just kept swinging. So I'll explain to them that you're not actually getting the added benefits that come from the amount of exercise that you're putting yourself under, because you never get back to rest and recovery. Your body is constantly in this sympathetic dominant state. And so the healing doesn't happen as quickly. And for people that compete, whether it's, like I said, weightlifting, CrossFit, athletics, the longer you stay in that sympathetic dominance, the more it's going to lend itself to potentially leading to injury down the line, because you're not recovering from the workouts as well as you may think you are. So that's something else that can happen under sympathetic dominance. Something else that'll happen, digestion and excretion. Those are going to get slowed down. Why is that? Well, if you need to run from a tiger, having to use the bathroom is probably not something you want to be overly concerned with, right? Or even digesting. All of these things are no longer not necessary, but they're no longer in the level of importance than get out of whatever danger there is, right? You are still in survival mode. You are not in growth mode. In fact, Dr. Bruce Lipton has a phenomenal quote that says, you can't be in growth and protection at the same time, right? Your body has to choose one or the other. My mom had a similar quote when I was a kid, right? You can't be in two places at once, which is essentially what Dr. Bruce is talking about, that your body has to be in one of these things or the other. Also, under sympathetic dominance, it's going to shunt the majority of your blood supply out away from those organs, because like I said, the majority of those organ functions are not near as important as it is from running away from this tiger or bear or whatever it is. And your body's going to redirect the majority of that blood supply. It's not going to redirect the entirety, right? But it's going to do the majority of that blood supply out to your arms and your leg muscles. Again, why? To run from the tiger, to fight the bear, whatever it is, you need that blood supply elsewhere. So those organs are only getting the bare minimum in order to function, not thrive, if that makes sense. And then all in all, it takes a far higher level amount of energy to consistently run the sympathetic division of your autonomic nervous system. It takes a ton more energy to be able to do all of these things, which is why we were designed to be like 90-10, right? About 10% of your life should be spent in sympathetic fight or flight mode, right? Because it does serve a purpose. There are times when people are in danger and they need to get away from there as fast as humanly possible, right? So it is a good thing to have the sympathetic nervous system, but what it is not designed for, it's designed for a couple of minutes to max a couple of hours. It was never designed to be in control for days, weeks, months, years unchecked. It was never designed for that. And so if that goes on for that long, some health issues are going to start to arise, because not only are those organs not getting the necessary amount of, like I said, the blood supply in order for you to thrive, but you're, like I said, you're constantly going to be in that fight or flight, that stressed out mode. And so because the world like we talked about, is becoming so stressful because we have so many more physical, mental, emotional stressors. It's starting to reverse that ratio. So now the majority of our time, if it's not 90-10, it could be anywhere to 60-40, 70-30 spent in sympathetic dominance, which it was never designed for, right? So what is that starting to look like for women specifically? So let's look at when women are pregnant. It should be a joyous time, right? But also growing your own human, that's also pretty stressful, right? It's going to come along with different stressors mentally, emotionally, physically. You're going to go through some changes physically, right? Things are going to be not where they used to be, right? You're going to have to make some room. Now it's a party for two, right? Table for two. Emotionally, this could be your first child, right? And you are nervous. You don't know what's going on. Everything is new. You just want it all to be okay. On top of mental stressors, maybe this is your third or fourth child and you have a family to run, or you have a business to run, or you just have work to go to. All of those things can add to that stress. And so something that we had talked about previously is for these 9 months, that baby truly understands how good of a time or how hard of a time mom is having, whether she is beyond stressed out or whether she is having a good time and getting through life, in a moderate capacity, efficiently, so to speak, right? And so this sustained fight or flight response not only affects a child, but it affects the birth process in general. Because if you think about what I had talked about with digestion and excretion, if there was a tiger in the room, would you want to be having a baby? No, you got to get the heck up out of there. But because our brains can't discern the difference between that and then the mental, physical, and emotional stressors of things today, the sympathetic, that dominance is still going to take over, even though that it's not in immediate danger, but because the threshold of stress that we're able to handle gets crossed, sympathetic dominance takes over. And so that's really going to hinder a mom's ability to have a smooth birth process, which could potentially lead to some interventions, whether she has to be induced, whether there is an epidural involved, whether it's an emergency C-section. All of these things can be a result from sympathetic dominance leading to an inefficient birthing process, right? So all of those things are happening before baby even comes out into the world. So the baby comes out into this, into this very bright, sterile environment. If the birth happens, in a hospital, and they've been stressed, they've been in sympathetic dominance while their nervous system was still developing. And you see nerves that fire together start to wire together, and now their ratio gets switched. 80% of their life, 90% of their life has been spent stressed out. So now what is that going to do? Well, there are really 3 main functions that your baby has to worry about. There's really only 3 things that your baby and that you should be concerned with for your baby. It's how well are they eating, how well are they sleeping, and how well are they pooping? How well is excretion happening? Well, if they're in that sympathetic dominance, right? And so if they're not able to eat what they need to be eating, if their digestion is not happening as efficiently as it should be, if they're constantly stressed out, sleep happens in a parasympathetic state. So if they're not getting the sleep that they need, they're constantly going to be exhausted, on top of the fact that they're using a ton of energy already because they're stuck in this sympathetic state. And it also limits their ability to poop. If it's limiting that efficiency, also, it's going to result in an unhappy baby. Could you blame that poor child for crying all the time because they're here, they've had it, they're at that level? The worst day that you have at the office, the worst day that you have on the ball field. Think about the most amount of stress that you're under. Are you usually the happiest? No. Are you usually pretty tired? Yes. That's why that's where the colic comes from. And I know sometimes doctors will just tell parents like, just wait it out. They'll be fine. They'll grow out of it. Babies don't grow out of anything. Much like energy or mass in the world, it can't be destroyed, right? It can only change forms, right? So what that looks like for a child is colic then turns into something like maybe ear infections. So then it goes from colic to ear infections. And now the doctor says, no, don't worry about it. We'll just put tubes in or they'll grow out of that, right? And then it continues to go down and it gets into the adenoids, right? So now all of a sudden their tonsils are really big and the doctor says, well, don't worry about that. We'll just take those out. Now, all of a sudden, they get sick all of the time. They have a ton of upper respiratory infections. And now, all of a sudden, they have sports-induced asthma. When in reality, if you go all the way back to the beginning, when they were that colicky baby, that was where the issue actually arose, right? And so if that continues to go on, not only in that sense, but also with kiddos with ADD or ADHD, kids with sensory processing disorders, kids with the weak immune systems, like I talked about with the upper respiratory infections, trouble regulating their emotions, all of those things, all of the logic, like I said, with regulating your emotions would fall under parasympathetic, but they spend the majority of their life in sympathetic dominance, being in fight or flight, which is why they have trouble sitting still, because they're just constantly pushing down on the gas pedal. So with all of that being said, what can we do to help with that? Like I said earlier, that's what chiropractic care is it's based on stress and allowing the body to more efficiently handle these stressors. And so not only are you going to be able to handle a greater amount of stress, you're going to be able to handle it more efficiently. And because you handle it more efficiently, you're going to have more energy to be used in other places. So for the quick baby example, they're going to be able to eat and digest better. They're going to be able to poop better. They're going to be able to fall asleep, which again is going to allow for them to have more energy. All of these things come by way of the chiropractic adjustment because, like I said, we are re-engaging that parasympathetic state. With each adjustment, Dr. Heidi Havoc did a phenomenal study on what actually happens when an adjustment occurs. There's very little activity that happens where the actual adjustment occurs. The activity actually happens in the brain, and it starts to create communication between the parasympathetic and the sympathetic divisions, and it starts to reallocate those percentages to the 80-20, 90-10 in favor of the parasympathetic division. And so that's what each adjustment is able to do, is we're allowing your child to be more efficient at handling stress. If they're more efficient, they're going to have more energy, and so on and so forth. So if this resonated with you, if this sounds like your child, or if this sounds like you, or if this sounds like somebody that you know, send them this podcast, tag them in any of our stuff, because we would love to be able to work with them or point them in the right direction. Because here at Innately Chiropractic, our mission is to help as many people as we can, but especially children. So until next time, this is the Innate Effect Podcast with Dr. Alex DeFrancisco.